In the early hours of January 15th, 2018, Dolores O'Riordan's voicemail greeted her old friend, Dan Waite, with a tone of unexpected cheeriness. The Cranberries' frontwoman gushed about a new hard rock cover of her 1994 hit Zombie, joking that she loved it and couldn't wait to lay down her own vocals for it later that day. Just hours later, O'Riordan was found lifeless in the bathtub of a London hotel room, gone at 46. The shockwaves from her sudden death rippled worldwide. How could the artist whose siren like a whale had defined a generation's angst be silenced so soon? O'Riordan was an Irish singer-songwriter, best known as the lead vocalist of the Cranberries, the band that rocketed to 1990s fame with hits like Linger and Zombie. With her keening mezzo-soprano, Celtic lilts and a punk ferocity, she cut an unforgettable figure in alternative rock. Yet behind the platinum records and electrifying performances lay a private life marked by trauma, turmoil, and extraordinary resilience. It is a story of dizzying highs and devastating lows, one in which a farmer's daughter from rural Ireland became a rock icon, all while wrestling inner demons that ultimately took a tragic toll. Welcome to Rock and Roll Mysteries. Dolores Mary Eileen O'Riordan entered the world on September 6, 1971, the youngest of 7 children in a devout Catholic family outside Limerick, Ireland. Home was Ballybricken, a village of verdant fields and close-knit faith, where her mother, Eileen, was a school caterer and her father, Terence, a farm labourer. 3 years before Dolores was born, Terence suffered a devastating motorcycle crash that left him brain damaged and unable to work. He remained a beloved if incapacitated presence, and the family survived modestly on Eileen's earnings and community support. Despite these hardships, Dolores later painted her childhood in warm tones. "I had the most cozy, loving childhood, all huddled up together," she reminisced, describing nights sharing beds and songs with her siblings in their humble cottage. Music was a constant comfort. Dolores was singing almost as soon as she could speak. Church hymns at Mass, folk tunes with her father, Elvis Presley hits from her mother's record collection. By age 5, she was performing solos in her local church choir, a tiny girl with a huge voice echoing under the stone vaults. "My mother introduced me to Elvis, and I grew up playing church organ and Gregorian chants. Great melodies," she recalled of those early influences. That mix of religious music and rock and roll would later infuse her unique vocal style. Before I get any further into Dolores' astonishing rise to fame and the dark story behind it all, I'd like to take a quick moment to make a big announcement. I'm starting a new series of mini episodes called Rock and Roll Histories, and they will be available to my supporters here in the YouTube members area and over on this shiny new Patreon page I just launched. Starting in August, there will be a 10 to 15 minute story every Thursday. I'll be covering all kinds of music-related subjects, including the story of the Monterey Pop Festival, Neil Young's darkest album, and the mad, bad punk rock world of CBGB. Joining up is just $5 a month, and that gets you a Rock and Roll Histories mini episode every week, as well as early access to the main videos and a few other perks too. Whether you sign up to Patreon or YouTube, it's the same deal. There's a link to the Patreon on screen now, so if you're interested in a bit more content, I'd love to see you over there. And as for the main episodes like this one, they'll always be free to air here on YouTube. Don't worry about that. This is just a bit of extra content for those who feel they can pitch in and help grow the channel. Thanks for your time. I'll get back into Dolores' story now. In the shadows of Dolores' idyllic account of childhood lay a secret and horrifying trauma. Starting at age 8, she was sexually abused by a person she trusted, repeatedly, over the course of 4 years. She told no one at the time. Only decades later, as an adult, would Dolores speak publicly about the ordeal. "I buried it because you're ashamed of it. You think it's your fault," she said, describing how the abuse bred in her a profound self-loathing. In interviews, she revealed that as a little girl, she had felt, quote, horrible and disgusting. In music, though, she found escape. At age 10, she taught herself guitar on a battered acoustic, and soon she was warbling Irish folk songs and writing her own simple melodies. By 12, she had composed her first song, a ballad called Calling, and she scrawled the lyrics in her school notebooks. It was a precocious display of the raw emotional honesty that would later become her songwriting hallmark. Nobody, however, knew the darker inspirations she was suppressing. I got famous when I was 18 and my career took over. It was even harder then to face the abuse. So then I developed the anorexia, Dolores reflected years later, linking her adolescent trauma to the eating disorder that would emerge amid her early fame. For now, that fame was still a few years away. As a teenager in the 1980s, Dolores was a petite, soft-spoken girl with a tomboyish pixie cut and a head full of music. She haunted the record shops in Limerick City, devouring cassette tapes of The Smiths, The Cure, Depeche Mode, and other moody alternative 80s bands that were then defining a generation's sound. She loved classic rock and traditional Irish folk in equal measure, yodeling along to her dad's country records one minute and blasting Metallica with her older brothers the next. That mix shaped her into a singular vocalist. Friends recall a quiet, diligent teen who would hum melodies to herself, walking the country lanes, seemingly ordinary until the moment she opened her mouth to sing for real. Even then, her voice could stop you in your tracks, high and airy one instant, then surging into a raspy rebel wail. It was a voice honed in church choirs and bedroom mirror sessions, and nourished by eclectic influences from Sinatra to Irish folk. She had no formal training, just an uncanny gift and an urge to use it. In 1989, at age 18, Dolores got a chance to make her dream a reality. Word in Limerick's small music scene was that a local alt-rock band called the Cranberry Saurus was looking for a new singer. The group, brothers Noel and Mike Hogan on guitar and bass, and their friend Fergal Lawler on drums, had been kicking around town with a male vocalist and a few goofy songs, but they knew they needed a stronger front person to make an impact. Dolores showed up to the audition unannounced, a shy slip of a girl clutching a keyboard under one arm and a notebook of lyrics in the other. She barely spoke, according to Noel Hogan, but once she started singing, everyone's jaws dropped. When she first sang, I wondered how and why she wasn't already in a band. I didn't want to question our luck, Hogan remembered. Dolores performed an early version of a love song she had written called Linger, her voice soaring from delicate whispers to a yodeling cry. The band immediately knew they had found their star. We were lucky enough that she had come into this room, Noel said of that fateful first meeting. The Cranberry Saurus quickly reinvented themselves around Dolores. They shortened the name to The Cranberries, recorded a demo cassette of songs, with O'Riordan's lilting Linger as a standout, and sent it around to various record labels. In 1991, that demo sparked a bidding war in both the UK and US. Critics were staggered by the young Irish woman's voice. One writer described it as the voice of a saint trapped in a glass harp, ethereal yet capable of shattering power. Island Records signed the band, and by early 1993, their debut album, Everybody Else Is Doing It, So Why Can't We, was released. At first it attracted little notice in Britain, but across the Atlantic, the album's romantic single Linger began to gain traction. College radio DJs and then MTV discovered the song's lush melancholy and Dolores' haunting "Do You Have to Let It Linger" refrain. Once MTV put the dreamy video into heavy rotation, American audiences fell in love. Everybody Else Is Doing It shot up the charts, eventually reaching #1 in the UK on its second go-around. By 1995, the debut had sold a staggering 5 million copies in the US alone. The Cranberries were no longer just Limerick's local secret, they were international stars. At the centre of this whirlwind was Dolores O'Riordan, barely 22, suddenly hailed as one of the most distinctive voices in rock. With her elfin looks and disarming County Limerick accent, Dolores was maybe an unlikely rock heroine. On stage in those early days, she was so timid that she sometimes performed with her back to the audience. Yet the moment she began to sing, she transformed. She could croon a ballad like Dreams with sweetness and clarity, then unleash a raw power on the chorus that sent chills down the spine. In performance videos from the mid-90s, one sees a petite woman stomping in Doc Marten boots, eyes closed and head tilted back as that ferocious voice erupts from her. Crucially, Dolores never mastered her Irish accent when she sang, even when some critics complained it was unorthodox for rock. She wasn't going to change her natural accent for anyone. Her accent curled around every syllable, giving the band a proud Irish identity in a sea of American grunge and Britpop. By late 1994, the Cranberries were riding high on the success of their second album, No Need to Argue, and its explosive lead single, Zombie. If Linger had showcased O'Riordan's delicate, romantic side, Zombie revealed her fury. She wrote the song in response to an IRA bombing in Warrington, England, that killed 2 young children in March 1993, an atrocity that horrified her and compelled her to speak out through music. Zombie was unlike any previous Cranberries track, a grungy, distortion-laden protest song in which Dolores' voice veered from eerie moans to guttural, rageful howls. It wasn't until Zombie that the sublime recklessness of Dolores O'Riordan's voice became fully evident, critic Amanda Petrusic observed. On the chorus, O'Riordan practically went feral, rolling the word zombie into an anguished war cry that echoed the pain of decades of violence in Northern Ireland. The band's record label was wary of releasing a politically charged single in the tense climate of the mid-90s peace process, but Dolores was adamant. The song came from her soul, and she delivered it with unflinching intensity, her voice ugly, wild, and paralyzing, in the words of The New Yorker. The gamble paid off. Zombie shot to #1 in multiple countries and became an anthem of outrage and healing. Its music video, with Dolores painted gold like a wrathful angel amid images of conflict, seared itself into MTV memory. Years later, the father of one bombing victim admitted he hadn't realized the song was inspired by his son's death until after Dolores died, which showed how abstract yet powerful her lyrics were. Zombie cemented the Cranberries' place in rock history and showed that Dolores was far more than a lilting chanteuse. She was an artist willing to scream about uncomfortable truths. As the band's fame peaked, Dolores' life became a blur of arena tours, TV appearances, and press interviews that she endured uneasily. In 1995, she graced the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, a 23-year-old Irish woman suddenly ranked among rock's biggest stars. She also found love amid the chaos. That same year, Dolores married Don Burton, the tour manager of Duran Duran, whom she had met on tour. The wedding at an Irish abbey was a media sensation. She arrived in a horse-drawn carriage, wearing a black bohemian gown, a typically unorthodox choice that nonetheless made the society pages. Despite the fairy tale trappings, Dolores craved normalcy. "All that star stuff, I tried to blank it out," she told journalists. Between tours, she would retreat to a newly purchased cottage by a lake in County Tipperary, where she and Don planted a garden and talked about starting a family. In 1997, she gave birth to their first child, a son named Taylor. Motherhood, she said, was transformative. "The kids were completely elemental in my healing process," Dolores said, referring back to the lingering wounds of her childhood abuse. She would go on to have 2 daughters, Molly in 2001 and Dakota in 2005, and often cited her children as her proudest accomplishments, even above her music. For a while in the mid-90s, it seemed Dolores truly had it all. Fame, fortune. By 1999, she was reportedly the 5th wealthiest woman in Ireland. A happy marriage, beautiful children, and artistic freedom to write from the heart. And yet behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to show. The relentless pressures of stardom were chipping away at her fragile and damaged psyche. What the world couldn't see was that the same woman electrifying stadiums with fearless anthems was privately grappling with nightmares she couldn't outrun. As early as 1994, during recording of the Cranberries' second album, Dolores suffered a serious knee injury in a skiing accident and spent weeks in a hospital bed. Ever the workaholic, she writes songs from her hospital room, but the forced stillness proved difficult. For the first time since her teen years, Dolores was left alone with her thoughts, and dark memories bubbled up. She began to experience bouts of depression and disordered eating. "I started to get really down on myself," she later said, explaining that unresolved pain from her past was resurfacing. On tour, she pushed herself mercilessly, determined not to let her band or fans down. But by 1996, during the grueling world tour for No Need to Argue, her mental and physical health hit a wall. The band abruptly cancelled the remainder of the tour, citing O'Riordan's exhaustion and disillusionment. She simply couldn't carry on at that pace. O'Riordan's first major breakdown came in 1996 on the heels of the band's whirlwind success. Barely in her mid-20s, she found herself overwhelmed by the glare of publicity and the weight of expectation. Naturally introverted, she struggled with the constant intrusion of fame. "It was always tougher for Dolores," recalled bassist Mike Hogan, noting how even mundane tasks like buying groceries became tabloid fodder in her hometown. The pressure to maintain a perfect image for fans and media fed into her old insecurities. Around this time, Dolores developed anorexia, starving herself in an attempt to assert some control amidst chaos. "You think it is your own fault. You have this terrible self-loathing," she said of the long-buried trauma that underlay her illness. Her bandmates were unaware of the full extent of her inner turmoil. Mental health was not exactly a topic openly discussed in 1990s rock circles, but they knew she was struggling. Noel Hogan observed that fame was wrecking her nervous system by the end of the decade. Still, Dolores pushed forward. The Cranberries released a third album, To the Faithful Departed, in 1996, which bore darker, heavier material, reflecting her state of mind. She even wrote one somber track, I'm Still Remembering, in the wake of Kurt Cobain's death. Reviews were mixed, and it sold only a fraction of the previous records, a stumble that Dolores took to heart. By 1999, after a fourth album and relentless touring, the Cranberries were burnt out. O'Riordan, nearing 30, decided she needed to step away and prioritize her sanity and family. In 2003, the band announced a hiatus. Dolores retreated to a quieter life, effectively dropping out of the spotlight for several years. She and Don Burton moved to a remote home in Ontario, Canada, to raise their young children away from paparazzi and music industry pressures. For a while, Dolores relished the simplicity of motherhood, baking cookies, doing school drop-offs, living a life that must have felt worlds away from rock stardom. She later said, "Having children changed my life for the better and gave her new purpose." Gradually, her equilibrium returned. She even found herself writing songs again at the piano, this time lullabies and introspective pieces inspired by domestic life. Still, the urge to create and the restlessness that had always driven her never left for long. She would say, "We needed time off, and a week later she'd be bored." Noel Hogan laughed, recalling Dolores' mercurial energy. By 2007, after a few years of domestic respite, Dolores dipped her toes back into music with a solo album titled Are You Listening? The album and its 2009 follow-up No Baggage allowed her to experiment beyond the Cranberries' sound, but met only modest commercial success. More importantly, they reminded her how much she loved songwriting. In interviews, she spoke of music as her therapy. "I write to get my emotions out. It's self-therapeutic," she told The Independent. "If I didn't have songwriting, I'd have a lot of pent-up stuff." She approached these solo projects on her own terms, working slowly, staying close to home. But the itch for the camaraderie of her old band grew. In 2009, O'Riordan surprised fans by reuniting with the Cranberries. The band members had stayed in touch during the hiatus. Noel Hogan even co-wrote some songs on her solo records, and all felt enough time had passed to rekindle their chemistry. The Cranberries launched a reunion world tour that year to rapturous response. Audiences spanning 2 generations packed theatres to hear those nostalgic 90s hits. Dolores, now in her late 30s, took the stage with renewed confidence. Motherhood had mellowed her in some ways. She'd restyled her trademark short hair into a chic mid-length cut and exuded a more grounded presence. But when she opened her mouth to sing, that timeless voice could still erupt like a volcano. As the years went down, She'd just got better and better, Noel Hogan remarked of hearing her in rehearsal again. The band recorded a new album, Roses, in 2012, and while it didn't dominate charts, it pleased die-hard fans and proved the Cranberries were back in fine form. Dolores also explored other creative outlets. She made a memorable appearance as a coach on The Voice of Ireland in 2013, mentoring young singers with a maternal toughness. And she formed a side project band called DARK in 2016 to dabble in electronic goth rock. By the mid-2000s and 10s, O'Riordan seemed to be balancing her past and present gracefully, rock icon and devoted mother, global star and small-town girl. Yet just as life appeared to stabilise, O'Riordan's inner battles returned with a vengeance. In 2011, her beloved father finally succumbed to cancer after years of ill health. Dolores was devastated, but the funeral was about to take an even darker turn. At his funeral in Ballybricken, her childhood abuser, a family friend, approached her to offer condolences. The encounter triggered a flood of traumatic flashbacks. I had nightmares for a year before my father's death about meeting him, she told journalist Barry Egan. The day it happened, I was petrified. I had blocked him out of my life, she said. The past she had tried so hard to bury was suddenly staring her in the face. O'Riordan's coping mechanisms began to falter. She started drinking heavily at times to numb the pain. I am pretty good, but sometimes I hit the bottle. I binge drink. That is my biggest flaw, she admitted in one candid interview. On top of that, her 20-year marriage was unravelling. In late 2014, Dolores and Don Burton separated, a split that left her feeling unmoored. She later described that period as intensely lonely, living out of hotels in New York, far from her kids, a life in flux. The pressure valve finally blew on November 10th, 2014. During a transatlantic Aer Lingus flight from New York to Shannon, Dolores reportedly had a manic episode at 30,000 feet. Fellow passengers watched aghast as the singer, who had been in first class, began shouting incoherently and roaming the aisles. When a flight attendant attempted to calm her, Dolores snapped. She stomped on the attendant's foot, injuring her, and upon landing in Ireland, things only escalated. As airport police and Gardaí, the Irish police, came aboard to escort her off the plane, O'Riordan flew into a rage. She punched and kicked, headbutting one officer and spitting in the face of another, all the while yelling, "I'm an icon, I'm the Queen of Limerick." It took several people to subdue the 5'2" rock star as she thrashed and screamed. She was handcuffed and arrested on charges of assault. The incident made international headlines, a shocking fall from grace for the singer once known for her almost angelic stage presence. But those close to Dolores recognized it as a cry for help. "My life has no control," she confessed to Barry Egan shortly after, an acknowledgement that she was in deep psychological trouble. Dolores avoided jail time for the air rage incident. In court the following year, she pleaded guilty but was deemed too mentally unwell at the time of the offence to be held fully accountable. Medical reports revealed she had been in a manic state. Her mother, Eileen, noted that Dolores had been under the care of a psychiatric doctor in the lead-up to the episode. The incident was a turning point. Finally, O'Riordan received a proper diagnosis for the turmoil she had long felt. In 2015, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The diagnosis made sense of her extreme mood swings, the euphoric highs when she'd send a dozen emails at 2 a.m. brimming with ideas, followed by crushing lows when depression would pin her to bed for days. There are two ends of the spectrum. You can get extremely depressed and dark, and then you can get super manic, she explained, describing how she'd go on and off between those poles. She began treatment with mood stabilizers and therapy and spoke openly about her mental illness in hopes of removing its stigma. With the benefit of hindsight, Dolores even addressed the attempt on her own life she had made in 2013 during one of her darkest periods. "I tried to overdose. I suppose I am meant to stay here for the kids," she said matter-of-factly. It was a heartbreaking admission, but also evidence of her will to keep fighting for the sake of her children. After her breakdown, Dolores O'Riordan worked hard to rebuild her life. By 2016, with proper medical care and support, she seemed to be on a steadier course. She was a lot more herself, Noel Hogan observed, of his friend's improved condition in later years. The cocktail of medications she was prescribed helped level out the extreme highs and lows. She also largely quit drinking for stretches, and she knew very well how alcohol could exacerbate her mood swings. The inquest after her death would reveal that she went through periods of sobriety punctuated by relapses of heavy drinking. But in 2016 to 2017, she was reportedly trying to stay on the wagon to preserve her health. With her bipolar disorder better managed, Dolores threw herself back into music. Songwriting again became a refuge and focus. Dolores had an awful lot going on, and she was on a roll of being able to write, Noel said of her creative burst around this time. She always quipped that it was easier to write when something was bothering her. Put a bit of misery in her life and it was easier, she half joked about her own muse. True to form, she channeled her struggles into new songs. In 2017, the Cranberries released an acoustic album, Something Else, reimagining their classics with an orchestral feel, and set out on what was meant to be a celebratory tour. Dolores was excited to connect with fans again, but fate intervened in the form of severe back pain. Midway through the European leg, she began experiencing debilitating pain, later revealed to be related to a spinal problem. The band reluctantly cancelled the remainder of the tour as Dolores sought medical treatment. She assured fans via Facebook in December 2017 that she was feeling good, and even performed a few songs at a holiday party in New York to test the waters. Indeed, friends say that by the very end of the year, Dolores was in a hopeful frame of mind. The worst of her psychological storms seemed to have passed. Her children, now in their teens, remained the center of her world. She often flew back to Ireland to spend time with them and her mother on the family farm. There were even stories of a new love interest. She had been dating Ole Koretsky, a bandmate in DARK, and she found companionship in music once again. As 2018 dawned, Dolores set out for London to work on new material. Officially, she was there to mix tracks for her DARK side project. She also had a meeting lined up that she was particularly thrilled about, adding her vocals to a metal cover of Zombie by the up-and-coming American band Bad Wolves. She had heard their hard-hitting rendition and given it her blessing, and now she wanted to contribute a bit of her original magic to it. On January 14th, 2018, she spent the night in her suite at the Hilton on Park Lane, preparing for the next day's session. Just after midnight, she rang up her friend Dan Waite, an executive at 11/7 Music, Bad Wolves' label, and left that fateful voicemail, praising the Zombie cover and looking forward to seeing everyone in the studio. She sounded full of life, joking and excited, Waite later said, recalling that nothing sounded amiss. A few hours later, in the quiet of early morning, Dolores phoned her mother back in Ireland, as she often did when she couldn't sleep. It was around 3 a.m. when Eileen O'Riordan answered to hear her daughter's voice. What they spoke about remains private, but that maternal connection was clearly a comfort to Dolores until the end. It was the last time they would ever speak. On the wet winter morning of January 15th, 2018, a housekeeper at the Hilton made a grim discovery. In room 2005's bathroom, Dolores O'Riordan was submerged face up in the tub, dressed in her pajamas, unresponsive. Paramedics arrived and tried to revive her, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead at 9:16 a.m. The news flashed around the globe within hours. Dolores O'Riordan dead at 46. Shock and grief poured out from fans and fellow musicians. The world has lost a true artist today, her bandmates wrote, mourning the woman they had been privileged to have been part of from 1989. In Dublin's Parliament, known as the Dáil, lawmakers stood in a moment of silence as the Prime Minister eulogised her as the irreplaceable voice of her generation. Social media lit up with tributes from the likes of U2, who said they were floored by the loss, and they praised Dolores' storm of a voice and spirit. To the public, the death was initially a mystery. Police ruled it unexplained but not suspicious, pending autopsy results. Rumours were kicking off, especially given her history. Had it been an intentional overdose, a relapse gone wrong, an accident? The truth, when it emerged months later, was that it had been a tragic accident. An inquest in September 2018 found that Dolores had drowned in her bath due to alcohol intoxication. Toxicology reports showed an extremely high blood alcohol level, 330 milligrams per 100 millilitres, more than 4 times the legal driving limit. She had apparently been drinking alone into the night. Police found 5 miniature liquor bottles and a champagne bottle emptied from her minibar around 2 a.m. Prescription medications were present in her bloodstream, but at therapeutic levels, and no illegal drugs were found. In other words, she did not intentionally harm herself that night. There was water in her lungs, indicating she lost consciousness and slipped under the water. The coroner, Dr. Shirley Radcliffe, said there's no evidence that this was anything other than an accident. There was no intention. Heartbreakingly, it appeared that O'Riordan had been in good spirits in her final days. Her US psychiatrist testified that in a phone check-in on December 26, 2017, she was doing well, not drinking, a little sad on Christmas, but no thoughts of suicide. A week before her trip, on January 9, 2018, she told her Irish therapist she was feeling hopeful and looking forward to the future. These reassurances make her accidental death all the more poignant, a cruel twist of fate just as she was finding balance. Dolores O'Riordan's funeral was held in her hometown of Ballybricken on a grey January day. Hundreds of mourners packed St Albans Church, the same village church where she had first sung as a child. Fittingly, the hymns included Ave Maria, a recording of Dolores' own ethereal duet with Luciano Pavarotti from 1995, played through the sanctuary, bringing many to tears. She was laid to rest alongside her father in the adjacent cemetery, a quiet country graveyard now forever visited by fans leaving notes and cranberries in her memory. In April 2019, her bandmates released In the End, the Cranberries' final album. Built around demo vocals Dolores had recorded in her last year. The songs ring with haunting poignancy. On the title track, she sings, "Ain't it strange? Everything we swore to be, we never were." A bittersweet coda to a brilliant but turbulent life. The album earned a Grammy nomination and served as a loving tribute from Noel, Mike, and Fergal, who made good on their promise. We will do this album and then that will be it. There is no need to continue as the Cranberries without Dolores. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Dolores O'Riordan's story is how much light she was able to create from darkness. The abuses she endured, the depression and anxiety that stalked her, somehow through it all, music became her catharsis and gift to the world. The songs that came out of her, despite everything, were incredible, reflected Kinks guitarist Dave Davies in remembering her. She was frank about her struggles, yet never wallowed. In one of her last interviews, she said, "I think I am getting stronger for sure, but I'll always be a bit of a train wreck. Those people who pretend they are perfect aren't perfect." That unvarnished honesty is a large part of why fans felt such a deep connection to her. Dolores didn't present a polished pop facade. She gave you her flawed, authentic self, and in doing so, helped listeners feel less alone with their own scars and sorrows. The final lines of the last song, on In the End, find Dolores singing, "I'll miss you when I'm gone." It's hard not to interpret it as a message from beyond, a kind of gentle goodbye from that familiar voice. And yet, she isn't truly gone. She lingers on in the collective memory of her turbulent 1990s glory days, in the influence on younger musicians, and most palpably in the recordings that continue to resonate in 2025 and will for decades to come. A rather sad ending to this one, but some of her songs were absolute classics. I doubt there's anyone who stood near a radio for more than a few hours back in the 90s that hasn't heard a Cranberries song. Anyway, why not let me know your favourite of her tunes down in the comments? And don't forget to have a look at the Rock and Roll Mystery Store, where I've got 6 completely exclusive sparkling rock and roll shirts now up for sale, designed by yours truly. I'm particularly pleased with the Mark Bolan one, so if you're a fan, you might want to have a gander. Why not pick yourself up something nice for summer? I've been Chester, cheers, and have a good one.